A short demurrer to the Jews' long discontinued remitter into England. Book 1. How the nation of the Jews, once God's own beloved, special, chosen people, after their malicious crucifying of our Savior Jesus Christ and imprecation, that his blood might be on them and their children, were for this their crying sin especially made the saddest spectacles of divine justice and human misery of all other nations in the world, being quite extirpated out of their own land, almost totally deleted by the sword, pestilence, and famine, carried away captives, and dispersed like so many vagabonds over the face of the whole earth, as the very offscouring of the world, and execration, derision of all other people, having no place, city, form of government, or republic-like of their own, in any corner of the universe, according to God's comminations against them, Leviticus 26:14-46, Deuteronomy 28:15-68, Jeremiah 9:10, Jeremiah 13:24, Ezekiel 5:2 to the end, Ezekiel 12:15, Ezekiel 22:15, Micah 1:21, and Matthew 24. Or what banishments, punishments, oppositions, restraints by penal laws, suppressions of their synagogues, ceremonies, have they received in all ages from Christian kings, princes, republics in foreign parts, for their implacable malice, blasphemy against our Savior Jesus Christ, Christians, Christian religion, and other crimes and misdemeanors to which they are most addicted, is not the subject of my intended brief discourse, and is so fully related by Josephus, Hegesippus, Eusebius, Nicephorus, Zonaras, Paulus Diaconus, Paul Eber, the Magdeburgian centuriators, out of them and other historians in their 2nd to their 13th centuries, chapter 14 and chapter 15, in Baronius his Annals, and in Heylon's Microcosm, page 568, 569, and 570, wherein all may peruse them, that I shall not spend time to recite them, but wholly confine myself to a brief relation of their first admission into, their ill deportment, misdemeanors, sufferings, popular insurrections against them in, and their final banishment by judgment and edict of Parliament out of England, never to return again, collected out of the best historians, to which I shall subjoin a taste only of such laws, scriptures, and reasons as seem strongly to plead against their readmission into our island, especially at this season. When the Jews came first into England appears not certainly by any historians, there being no mention of their being here in any of our British or Saxon kings' reigns, to my remembrance. Antoninus, in his Chronicles, Title 16, Section 5, records that William the Conqueror, King of England, translated the Jews from Rome to London, and the Magdeburg centuries out of him. Century 11, Chapter 14, column 686. Add thereto that it was ob numeratum pretium, for a sum of money given to him by them, which I find not in Antoninus. Both these authors intimate that this was their first arrival in England, yet in what year of this king they are silent. With them concurs Raphael Holinshed, Volume 3, page 15, where thus he writes, among other grievances which the English sustained by the hard dealings of the Conqueror, this is to be remembered, that he brought Jews into the land from Rouen, that is Rouen, and appointed them a place to inhabit and occupy, reputing their very first introduction a grievance to the English and hard dealing, which John Stow, in his Annals of England, page 103, and Survey of London, printed 1633, page 288, thus seconds. King William first brought the Jews from Rouen here to inhabit in England, and Sir Richard Baker, in his Chronicle of the Kings of England, London, 1653, page 39. This King William was the first that brought the Jews to inhabit here in England. But this law concerning the Jews, inserted amongst the laws of the Confessor's time, seems to prove their arrival and settlement in England to be before this Norman's reign, unless misplaced in point of time amongst the laws by Hoveden, being rather, in my opinion, a declaration of the Jews' servile condition under King William and Richard I, when Hoveden writ, than any law in King Edward's reign, or before, amongst whose laws or the Conqueror's it is not to be found in Abbot Ingulphus, his original copy, published by Mr. Selden in his Notae and Specialigeum ad Edmerum, page 172, etc., as the words themselves import. De Judeis in Regno, of the Jews established in the kingdom, it must be known that all the Jews, wherever they are in the kingdom, are under the protection and defense of the Lord the King, nor can any one of them subject himself to any rich man without the king's permission. Jews and everything belong to the king. But if any one has withheld his money from them, the king may search it as if it were his own. Now this law or declaration, being the first record-making mention of their being and condition in England, proves that as all the Jews when they came first into England were under the king's protection and patronage wherever they resided, so they were all under him only as his mere vassals, their persons and goods being his alone, and that they could dispose of neither of them without his license, into which slavish condition they doubtless then put themselves, being banished out of other nations for their villainies, only to avoid the fury of the common people, to whom they were most detestable, who else would have quickly murdered or stoned them to death, and stripped them of all their wealth, as the sequel will declare. The next passage in Historians concerning the Jews' being and condition in England is that of William of Malmesbury, in William Rufus, his reign. The Jews, writes he, in his time gave a testimony of their insolency, once at Rome, endeavoring by gifts to persuade and revoke certain men to Judaism who had deserted their error. Another time at London, being animated to enter into a combat or dispute against our bishops, because the king, in merriment, as I believe, had said that if they should overcome the Christians and confute them by open arguments, he would then revolt to them, and become one of their sect. Whereupon it was managed with great fear of the bishops and clergy, and with pious solicitude of such who were afraid of the Christian faith's miscarriage. And from this combat the Jews only brought away nothing besides confusion, although they would many times boast that they were overcome not by argument or reason, but by a faction. Antoninus, relating the story in the same words, adds only this, that the Jews, coming to this king on a certain solemnity, and offering him gifts after their removal from Rome to London, he thereupon animated them to a conflict against the Christians, swearing by St. Luke's face that if they overcame them, he would revolt to their sect, as if he spake it in good earnest, with whom the Magdeburg Centuries, John Stow in his Survey of London, page 288, and Sir Richard Baker in his Chronicle, page 51, accord. By which we may observe that the Jews were no sooner transported and settled in Rome and London, but they presently began to grow very insolent against the Christians, endeavoring to pervert some of them by moneys to Judaism, attempting to corrupt the king himself by gifts, to side with them against the bishops and clergy, and to become one of their sect, by entering into open disputations with the bishops and clergy against the Christian faith, to the great fear of the professors and hazard of the Christian religion, by boasting frequently, when they were overcome, that it was only by power and faction, not by truth or disputation. And will not this be their very practice now, if readmitted, to the hazard of our Christian religion and seduction of many simple, unstable souls in this unsettled, apostatizing age, when not only the ignorant people, but many great professors turn atheists, heretics, seekers, apostates, blasphemers, ranters, Quakers, anti-scripturists, and what not, but real, upright, just, and mortified, self-denying Christians. The history of William Rufus causing a disputation between the Christians and the Jews is related by Raphael Holinshed in his Chronicle, Volume 3, page 27, who likewise records of him that he being at Rome on a time, there came to him divers Jews who inhabited that city, complaining to him that divers of that nation had renounced their Jewish religion, and were become Christians. Wherefore they besought him that for a certain sum of money which they offered to give, it might please him to constrain them to abjure Christianity, and turn to the Jewish law again. He was content to satisfy their desires, and so receiving the moneys, called them before him, and what with threats, and putting them otherwise in fear, he compelled divers of them to forsake Christ, and to turn to their old errors. Hereupon the father of one Stephen, a Jew, converted to the Christian faith, being sore troubled for that his son was turned a Christian, and hearing what the king had done in such like matters, presented to him 60 marks of silver, conditionally, that he should enforce his son to return to the Jewish religion, whereupon the young man was brought before the king, unto whom he said, Sir, thy father here complaineth, that without his license thou art become a Christian. If this be true, I command thee to return again to the religion of thy nation, without any more ado. To whom the young man answered, Your grace, as I guess, doth but jest. Wherewith the king, being moved, said, What? Thou dunghill knave, should I jest with thee? Get thee hence quickly, and fulfill my commandment, or by St. Luke's face I shall cause thine eyes to be plucked out of thine head. The young man, nothing abashed thereat, with a constant voice, answered, Truly, I will not do it, but know for certain that if you were a good Christian, you would never have uttered any such words. For it is the part of a Christian to reduce them again to Christ, which are departed from him, and not to separate them from him, which are joined to him by faith. The king, herewith confounded, commanded the Jew to avaunt, and get him out of his sight. But his father, perceiving that the king could not persuade his son to forsake the Christian faith, required to have his money again, to whom the king said he had done as much as he promised to do, that was, to persuade him so far as he might. At length, when he would have had the king to have dealt further in the matter, the king, to stop his mouth, tendered back to him 1/2 of his money, and retained the other to himself. All which increased the suspicion men had of his infidelity. By this history we may perceive what a prevailing engine the Jews' money is, both to serve them into Christian kingdoms, though the most bitter, inveterate, professed enemies of Christ himself, Christians and Christianity, and how their money can induce even Christian princes to perpetrate most unchristian and anti-Christian actions, and enforce by threats and violence even converted Christian Jews to renounce their Christianity, and apostatize to their former Jewish errors, which they had quite renounced. And do not they still work even by the self-same money engine, preferred by too many Christians before Christ himself and Christianity? In the year of our Lord, 1145, during the reign of King Stephen, the Jews grew so presumptuous in England that they crucified a child called William in the city of Norwich, in derision of the Christian religion, as Matthew Westminster, Flores Historiarum, Annals 1145, page 36, and others jointly attest. Not long after this, Anno 1160, the 6th year of the reign of Henry II, they crucified another child at Gloucester in contempt of Christ and his passion, as John Brompton's Chronicon and others record. And in the same king's reign, 1181, upon the same account, the Jews on the feast of Easter martyred and crucified another child at St. Edmundsbury, called Robert, who was honorably interred soon after in the church of St. Edmund's, and grew famous by miracles there wrought, as Gervasius Dorobernensis in his Chronica, column 1458, relates. What punishments were then inflicted on them for these murders and insolencies I find not recorded. Perchance they purchased their peace with moneys. Yet I read that in the year 1168 King Henry II, wanting moneys, banished the wealthiest of the Jews out of England, and fined the rest of them in 5,000 marks, most likely for these their misdemeanors. John Stow, in his Survey of London, page 288, writes that King Henry II grievously punished the Jews for corrupting his coin, which no other historian mentions. The Jews, though there were a great multitude of them in England, in every quarter of the realm, had only one churchyard allotted them, and that at London, near Redcross Street, in which they were enforced to bury all their dead corpse, wheresoever they died, which being a great trouble and annoyance to them, thereupon, in the year 1178, they petitioned King Henry II, being at Stanstead, for a license to have churchyards without the cities wherein they inhabited, in convenient places where they could purchase them, wherein to bury their dead, which he then granted them. It seems the Jews were then so odious to the whole nation that they would not permit them to bury their very dead corpse in any English soil, for fear of polluting it, nor near any Christian bodies, without the king's special license. Neither did they desire to be interred near or amongst any Christian corpse, out of detestation to them, as if one earth could no more contain them than one heaven, which the Jews would engross to themselves alone. Now, King Richard I being to be crowned king at London in the year of our Lord 1189, the chiefest of the Jews flocked together from all parts to his coronation, resolving to purchase the favor of the new king with most ample gifts, and to get their former privileges confirmed, which they feared they should lose. But they being suspected of sorcery and magic, the king, by a public proclamation, prohibited all Jews from entering the church whilst he was crowning, or his palace whilst he was therein feasting. Notwithstanding, some of the principal Jews secretly got into the church and palace, who being discovered one after another were well beaten and thrust out of the church and court by the king's officers and Christians. Upon which the common people, then flocking in great multitudes to the king's coronation, fell upon the Jews, standing in great multitudes at the palace gate, first beating them with their fists, and then taking up clubs and stones, slew some of them, and left the others half dead. Whereupon one of them, called Benedict of York, being so beaten and wounded that he despaired of life, and extraordinarily terrified with the fear of death, received baptism from William, the prior of St. Mary's of York, and thereby escaped the peril of death and hands of the persecutors. In the meanwhile, there was a great rumor spread throughout the city of London upon this occasion, that the king desired and had commanded that all the Jews should be banished and destroyed, whereupon an infinite number of people, as well out of the city as most counties of England then coming to the coronation, inflamed with the desire of booty, betaking themselves to their arms, fell pell-mell upon the Jews, and slew and pillaged them both in the streets and in their houses, and those who defended themselves for a time in such strong houses which they could not enter, were there soon after burnt and consumed, together with their houses, by the furious multitude who put fire to their houses, and burnt down most of them, synagogae, datae, dedicorae, and likewise defaced their synagogues, as Radulfus du Dicceto records. The king being informed hereof, whilst he was feasting with his nobles, thereupon sent Ranulfus de Glandeville, then Chief Justice of the realm, a potent and prudent man, together with other great noblemen, to persuade and restrain these bold people. But all in vain, for in so great a multitude none would hear their voices, nor reverence their persons, but rather murmuring against them, exhorted them speedily to return, whereupon they advisedly declining their unbridled rage, the fury of these plunderers ceased not till the next day. Ac licet and although the immensity of such a rabies, if concealed and past much, would greatly blacken the beginnings of the royal majesty, yet because of the infinite multitude of the guilty, it was necessary to conceal that which could not be avenged. So writes Henry de Knighton. Yet the very next day the king, sending his officers throughout the city, commanded some of the said malefactors to be apprehended, and brought before him, of which 3 were hanged by the judgment of his court, 1, because he had stolen the goods of a certain Christian, and 2, because they had made a fire in the city, whereby the houses of Christians were burned. After which the king sent for the man, who of a Jew was made a Christian, and demanded of him, in the presence of those who had seen him baptized, whether he were made a Christian, who answered, that he was not, but that he permitted the Christians to do to him what they would, that he might escape death. Then the king demanded of the Archbishop of Canterbury, in the presence of many archbishops and bishops, what was to be done concerning him, who answering very indiscreetly said, if he will not be a man or servant of God, let him be a man or servant of the devil. And so he returned to the Judaical law and pravity, like a dog to his vomit, and soon after died at Northampton, and was deprived of the common burial of the Jews, because he had been made a Christian in this manner, and likewise of the common burial with the Christians, because he apostatized to the Jewish wickedness, for which some would have had him proceeded against as an apostate. In the meantime, the king sent his writs throughout all the counties of England, prohibiting that none should do any harm to the Jews, but they should enjoy his peace. But before that edict was published, the Jews, which were in the town of Dunstable, to preserve their lives from the people's fury, being converted to the Christian faith, were baptized, betrothing their wives after the manner of Christians, which was likewise done throughout many cities of England. And although the king by his proclamation had decreed peace to the Jews, yet notwithstanding the fury against the Jews kindled at London, not verily out of a zeal of faith, but of gain, vehemently raged in other places of the land. For a certain Jew at Lyne, happening to be made a Christian, thereupon the Jews persecuting him, as a prevaricator of their law, taking an opportunity, assaulted him with arms as he passed through the city, whereupon he took sanctuary in the church, yet notwithstanding the raging Jews would not rest quiet for this, but with a continued fury presently began to assault the church with great violence. Presently, hereupon, there arose a great clamor, and the Christians' assistance was desired with loud outcries. This clamor and fame incensed the Christian people, and young men which were strangers, of which a great number at that time resorted thither, by reason of traffic, who, running to the church armed, valiantly assaulted the proud Jews, who, being unable to resist the assault of the Christians, presently betook themselves to flight. After which, the Christians, assaulting and taking their houses, spoiled and then burnt them with fire. Hereupon the young men who were strangers, laden with prey, departed with it speedily to their ships, and failed thence, lest they should be questioned, and perchance enforced to restore their booty by the king's officers. But the inhabitants of the place, when they were questioned for this by the king's officers, translated this fact to the strangers who were then departed from thence, although themselves were not altogether innocent, taking up arms against the Jews upon the outcry, but yet doing nothing against the Jews for fear of the king's displeasure. Not long after, in Lent, there arose a new storm against the Jews at Stanford, for there being solemn fairs there held in Lent, the young men and soldiers who had taken upon them the sign of the cross, and were then ready to go to Jerusalem with the king, assembling together there out of divers counties, disdaining that the Jews, being the enemies of the cross of Christ, possessed such great store of goods and wealth, when as they had not sufficient to defray the necessary expenses of so great a journey, and imagining that they should do God good service, if they assaulted these his enemies, boldly rushed upon them, no man opposing himself against so great attempts. Whereupon divers of the Jews were slain, and the rest being received into the castle, hardly escaped with their lives, their goods being all plundered, and the plunderers departing freely away with their booty, none of them being so much as questioned or punished by the king's discipline. The citizens of Lincoln, hearing what was done to the Jews of Stanford, taking occasion, and being animated by the examples of others, were willing to do something against them, and being assembled together against the Jews inhabiting together with them, became enraged against them. But these Jews, being made more wary by the slaughters and damages of others, some few of them suffering harm and damages, the rest fled timely with their monies into the royal fort, and there secured themselves. In all other places wheresoever the Jews were found, they were pillaged and slain by the hands of the pilgrims, who, hastening through England toward Jerusalem, decreed to rise up first against the Jews, before they invaded the Saracens. Hereupon, all the Jews who were found in their own houses at Norwich were slain on the 8th of February, some few of them only escaping to the castle. At the same time, the nobles and gentry of Yorkshire, nothing fearing the king's proclamation, the wicked Jews having by usury reduced them to extreme poverty, joining with them some holy soldiers, brake up the houses of the chief Jews, equal to the king's palace, slew their families, spoiled their goods, and burnt their houses in the night, and then retired themselves to their homes in the dark. After which, the promiscuous multitude, making an assault upon the Jews, slew them without distinction of sex or age, except some few who would give up their names to Christ in baptism to save their lives. On the 18th day of April, being Palm Sunday, the rest of the Jews in the city of York, being 500 men and women, besides their children, fearing the violence of the Christians, shut up themselves within the castle of York by the will and consent of the guardian thereof, and of the sheriff, who being thus received into the castle for their defense by the guardian and sheriff, would not afterwards deliver it up again unto them. Whereupon the sheriff and keeper of that castle, being very much offended with them, assembled the soldiers of the county and men of the city, that they might free the castle from those Jews, exhorting them to do their utmost endeavors to effect it, who, when they had assaulted the castle day and night, the Jews offered a great sum of money to save their lives, but all in vain, the people being so incensed against them that they would not accept it, whereupon a certain Jew, skillful in their law, stood up and said, Men of Israel, hearken to my counsel. It is better for us to die for our law than fall into the hands of the enemies of our law, and our very law commands the same thing. Upon which all the Jews, as well women as men, consented to his counsel, and every father of a family, going with a sharp razor, first of all cut the throats of his own wife and children, and then of his family, casting the dead corpse of those whom they had thus sacrificed to devils over the castle walls upon the Christian people. After which, burning their rich clothes, and casting their golden vessels and jewels into privies, that the Christians might not be enriched by them, these murderers, shutting up themselves and the rest they had killed in the king's house, set it on fire, and so burnt both themselves and it. After which the citizens of York and the soldiers of the county, burning all the Jews' houses together, spoiled their goods, seized their possessions to themselves, and burned all the charters of their debts.